You brush twice a day, you floss, you use mouthwash, you scrape your tongue, you do everything right, and your breath is still not right. Maybe you noticed it yourself, maybe someone you love said something, maybe you started keeping mints in every bag, every drawer, every pocket, just in case. Maybe you stopped letting people get close enough to notice. You went to your dentist. They checked everything. No cavities, no gum disease, no infection. Everything looks fine, they said. Keep doing what you're doing, but you're still dealing with it. And nobody has explained why. Here is what nobody told you. For millions of women over 40, chronic bad breath is not a dental problem. It is not a hygiene problem. It is not something more mouthwash is going to fix. It is a hormonal problem. And it started the moment your estrogen began to decline. In this video, you are going to understand exactly what is happening inside your mouth during the menopausal transition that causes this, and why every solution you have tried has only masked it instead of addressing what is actually driving it. Stay with this, because what comes next is going to completely reframe something you have been blaming yourself for. Before we get into the hormone connection, you need to understand what bad breath actually is at a biological level, because most people have it completely wrong. Bad breath is not caused by food sitting in your mouth. It is not caused by poor brushing. In the vast majority of cases, it is caused by one thing: sulfur-producing bacteria. Your mouth contains hundreds of species of bacteria. Most of them are harmless or actively beneficial, but a specific group, anaerobic bacteria, produce volatile sulfur compounds as a byproduct of their metabolism. These compounds are what create the distinctive odor associated with bad breath. The two most significant are hydrogen sulfide and methyl mercaptan. If those names sound industrial, it's because the compounds are genuinely potent. Even in tiny concentrations, they are detectable and unpleasant. Here's the critical point. These bacteria exist in everyone's mouth. What determines whether they produce enough sulfur compounds to cause bad breath is the environment they are living in. Give them a warm, dry, protein-rich, low-oxygen environment, and they thrive. They multiply, they produce more sulfur, the breath gets worse. Take that environment away. Keep the mouth well lubricated, maintain a healthy pH, support the bacterial balance, and their activity is suppressed. The breath improves. This is why the solution to chronic bad breath is never more mouthwash. Mouthwash kills bacteria indiscriminately, good and bad, and most formulations contain alcohol, which dries the mouth. A dry mouth is exactly the environment sulfur-producing bacteria need to flourish. You are making the problem worse with the thing you bought to fix it. The real question is, what is creating that environment in the first place? And for women over 40, the answer is almost always hormonal. Estrogen does something in your mouth that almost no one talks about. Your salivary glands contain estrogen receptors. This is documented in the scientific literature and largely unknown outside of specialized research. It means estrogen actively participates in regulating both the volume and the composition of saliva your body produces every day. When estrogen is present at healthy levels, your salivary glands produce adequate saliva, the right volume, the right pH, the right balance of antimicrobial proteins and enzymes. That saliva continuously washes away bacterial waste, neutralizes acids, and maintains the kind of oral environment where sulfur-producing bacteria are kept in check. When estrogen drops, as it does during perimenopause and menopause, salivary gland function changes with it. Output decreases, the composition shifts, the mouth becomes drier, the pH becomes more acidic, and the environment that suppressed those sulfur-producing bacteria starts to disappear. This is why so many women in their 40s and 50s develop bad breath that was never a problem before, despite having the same hygiene habits they have always had. The hygiene did not change. The hormonal infrastructure supporting their oral environment changed. But estrogen loss affects the mouth in another way that goes beyond saliva. The oral mucosa, the soft tissue lining of your mouth and gums, is also estrogen sensitive. When estrogen declines, this tissue thins and becomes more permeable. The gum tissue becomes more reactive to bacterial irritation. Inflammation increases. And inflamed, bleeding gum tissue is one of the richest environments for anaerobic bacteria. This is not coincidence. This is a direct hormonal cascade. Estrogen drops, saliva decreases, oral pH shifts, gum tissue becomes inflamed, anaerobic bacteria flourish. Volatile sulfur compounds increase, and the breath changes in a way that no amount of brushing is going to fix. Now add the second hormone that changes after menopause, cortisol. Without estrogen to buffer it, cortisol becomes more volatile after the menopausal transition. It stays elevated longer, and elevated cortisol has a direct effect on the mouth that almost nobody discusses. Cortisol activates the sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight branch of your autonomic nervous system. When the sympathetic system is dominant, saliva production shifts. The body produces less of the watery, high-volume saliva that keeps the mouth moist and clean. Instead, what saliva remains becomes thicker and more viscous. And thicker saliva is significantly less effective at flushing bacterial waste and maintaining pH balance. There is also a direct relationship between cortisol, inflammation, and gum health. Elevated cortisol suppresses immune function in the gum tissue, making the gums more susceptible to the kind of chronic low-grade bacterial inflammation that produces the most significant sulfur compounds. This is why bad breath in menopausal women tends to be worst in the morning, after a night of reduced saliva production, elevated cortisol, and hours of unchecked bacterial activity, and why it often does not respond to the solutions that work for other people. The bacteria are not the root problem. The hormonal environment driving bacterial overgrowth is the root problem. It is worth pausing here to acknowledge something that the clinical description of this problem tends to skip over. Chronic bad breath is not just a physical issue. It is one of the most psychologically isolating symptoms a person can experience. It changes how you move through the world. It changes how close you let people get. It changes how you speak. Whether you cover your mouth, whether you turn away mid-sentence, whether you cut conversations short. It affects intimacy. It affects confidence in professional settings. It creates a constant low-level vigilance that is exhausting in a way that is very difficult to explain to someone who has never experienced it. And because it is a symptom that carries social stigma, the assumption that it reflects poor hygiene or poor self-care, most women suffer through it quietly. They do not bring it up with their doctor. They do not connect it to their hormones. They just manage it as best they can and carry the shame of it privately. Understanding that this symptom has a physiological root, a hormonal root, does not fix it immediately, but it removes the shame. And removing the shame is the first step toward actually solving it. Several factors layer on top of the hormonal shift and amplify the problem significantly. Alcohol-based mouthwash. This bears repeating because it is so counterproductive. The alcohol in most conventional mouthwashes aggressively dries oral tissue. For a mouth already struggling with estrogen-related dryness, using alcohol-based mouthwash is one of the most reliable ways to make bad breath worse over time. The short-term freshening effect masks the problem while the drying effect deepens it. Medications. More than 400 commonly prescribed medications list dry mouth as a side effect. Antihistamines, antidepressants, blood pressure medications, and diuretics are among the most significant. Many women over 40 are taking more than one of these. The medication effect compounds the hormonal effect, and the result is a significantly drier oral environment than either factor alone would produce. Mouth breathing at night. Airflow across oral tissue during sleep evaporates saliva rapidly. Women who breathe through their mouth, whether from congestion, habit, or sleep apnea, wake up with dramatically elevated bacterial counts and significantly worse breath than nasal breathers. Sleep apnea in particular is underdiagnosed in women and becomes more common after menopause. Diet patterns. High-protein diets without adequate fiber create more substrate for sulfur-producing bacteria. Low-carbohydrate diets specifically produce ketones that are detectable on the breath as a distinctly different odor, often described as fruity or chemical. Alcohol, even in moderate amounts, reduces overnight saliva production significantly. Dehydration. Chronic mild dehydration, which is extremely common and often unrecognized, reduces saliva volume throughout the day and concentrates bacterial waste products in the mouth. Most women are not drinking nearly enough water to compensate for the reduced salivary output that comes with hormonal change. Now, the practical part. What actually addresses the root of this problem rather than masking it. Step 1. Replace your mouthwash. If you are using an alcohol-based mouthwash, stop. Replace it with one of two things: a xylitol-based rinse, which stimulates saliva production and has genuine antimicrobial properties against the specific bacteria responsible for sulfur production, or a rinse containing cetylpyridinium chloride, which reduces anaerobic bacterial populations without the drying effect of alcohol. Neither of these will give you the burning sensation you may associate with mouthwash working. That burning is the alcohol. It is not therapeutic. It is damaging. Step 2. Address saliva production directly. Xylitol, found in certain gums, mints, and rinses, directly stimulates salivary gland output. Chewing sugar-free xylitol gum for 5 minutes after meals meaningfully increases saliva flow and helps clear bacterial waste between brushing. Staying genuinely well hydrated throughout the day is not optional for this problem. The target is not 8 glasses. It is enough that your urine is consistently pale. For most women dealing with hormone-related dry mouth and bad breath, this requires deliberate effort. Step 3. The tongue. The back of the tongue, specifically the posterior dorsum, is the primary reservoir for sulfur-producing bacteria in the vast majority of bad breath cases. This area is largely unreached by brushing and even by most mouthwashes. A tongue scraper used from back to front every morning before anything else removes the bacterial film that has accumulated overnight. This single habit, done consistently, reduces volatile sulfur compound production more effectively than any mouthwash. Step 4. Timing of oral care. Most people brush, then eat breakfast, then leave the house. The bacteria in your mouth feed on whatever you eat and immediately begin producing sulfur compounds again. Brushing after breakfast, not before, removes that substrate before it has time to ferment. If you use xylitol gum, use it after eating, not before. Step 5. Support the gum tissue. If your gums are inflamed, if they bleed when you brush or floss, even occasionally, that tissue is actively feeding the bacteria responsible for bad breath. Anti-inflammatory support for gum tissue starts with consistent flossing, but also includes reducing dietary sugar, which feeds the most aggressive oral bacteria, and ensuring adequate vitamin C and omega-3 intake, both of which have documented effects on gingival inflammation. Step 6. The hormonal conversation. For women whose bad breath developed or significantly worsened during the menopausal transition, alongside other symptoms like dry mouth, increased gum sensitivity, or changes in taste, the most direct intervention addresses the root cause. The connection between estrogen, salivary function, and oral health is documented and is a legitimate subject to raise with a healthcare provider familiar with menopause management. Addressing the hormonal environment does not replace oral hygiene, but it changes the biological terrain that hygiene is working within. You have been managing this symptom, hiding it, working around it, spending money on products that temporarily cover it while the underlying cause continues untouched. Now you know what is actually driving it. It is not your hygiene. It is not your diet. It is not something you did wrong. It is a hormonal shift that changed the environment inside your mouth in ways that your existing habits were never designed to address. The bacteria are responding to that environment. Change the environment and their behavior changes with it. That is not a complicated idea, but it requires understanding the actual cause, which is exactly what you now have. The next video goes into the specific oral symptoms that appear during perimenopause that almost no one connects to hormones, changes that show up in your mouth before they show up anywhere else, and that your dentist may be seeing without knowing what they mean. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And tell me in the comments, how long have you been dealing with this? And did anyone ever connect it to your hormones? Every single comment gets read, and your answer shapes what this channel covers next. This content is for informational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice.